Good morning. Welcome to Community Unitarian Universalist Church of Plano. I'm Sarah Reiling, one of the worship associates, and part of the team that works to bring the worship services to you each week. We're glad you're here with us today. Whether you're a member or a new visitor, we welcome you. Whether you're here in the sanctuary with us or watching online at home, may you find connection with us and nourishment for your mind and spirit. Here at Community UU, we welcome all of who you are and all of who you dream of becoming. Our call to worship today is by Bran, Lennox. We have chosen to bring ourselves here to this sanctuary together as a community of faith. We join together in solidarity as a covenanted people who are drawn together by the promise of connection and the mysterious pull of the unanswerable. We draw on experiences of love and wonder to lift our hearts and move us beyond the mundane. As seekers, wanderers, appreciators of nature, connoisseurs of curiosity, and creators of connection, our paths have converged today so that we might become present to the spirit that is worship. And so let us worship together. We light our chalice today in connection and solidarity with all other UU congregations who are also lighting their chalices this morning. Our chalice reading is The Great Turning by Lisa Garcia-Sampson, and our chalice lighter is Betsy Friauf.
In these wild, historic, and uncertain times, we gather to remember who we are, who we belong to, and what we are called to do. As we light this chalice, we kindle the spirit of the Great Turning, the movement for justice alive in this nation today. May we feel it in our bones, and in the stillness of this hour, may we sense it calling our name.
Thank you, Betsy. This church, like all Unitarian Universalist churches, is not bound by a common creed. We are not required to make a statement of belief. Instead, we are bound together by our covenant, the promises we have made to each other and the wider community. We recommit ourselves to these sacred promises each time we recite our covenant. Please join me as once again we say these words together. Love is the spirit of the church, and service is the law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth and freedom, and to help one another. So the picture on our reading is the cover of the book, of Michael and Betsy's book, right? All right. And this is from the book. Monsters haunted the imaginations of some of the most educated white Texans from the 1850s to the dawn of World War II. Many of the presumed best and brightest in the state imagined a future when murderers, rapists, and sexual deviants would run amok, ripping asunder the delicate web of civilization. The well-read and versed in the latest race science pictured a host of those they demeaned as inferiors. Immigrants, poor whites, African Americans, Tejanos, as well as the mentally ill and disabled, banding together to overthrow elite rule. The state could collapse into a war of all against all, they warned. In such a twilight struggle, by sheer numbers, those they despised as mentally and culturally inferior might one day overwhelm their presumed betters, all for the privilege of ruling over the ruins. Ambivalent about the modern age, many of the state's intellectuals pored worriedly over immigration numbers and crime statistics in rapidly growing cities. Molded by intense xenophobia, they recoiled at an unwelcome babble of tongues in urban neighborhoods and thought wistfully of the day when only English was heard during a city stroll. They fretted over climbing admissions to the state's threadbare mental health institutions and the escalating population of its prisons. They measured skulls and IQs to detect signs that human evolution had been thrown into reverse. They saw a collapse of the American identity and a crumbling of law and order. As their state changed, many Texans in the professional and political class saw portents of an impending biological Armageddon. Politicians, surgeons, university professors, public school teachers, experts in juvenile delinquency, psychiatrists, and newspaper editorialists fretted about how they could eliminate socialism, anarchism, insanity, mental and physical defects, and marginalized sexual behaviors by controlling who could mate or immigrate into the state. Only stringent eugenic measures could save Texas from social collapse and a bloodletting like that attended the French Revolution, the public heard. Eugenics sank wide but shallow roots into the Texas soil. The history of Texas eugenics encompassed startling twists and turns, eccentric characters, warped idealism, malignant prejudices, surprising defects, and a disturbing, though subtle, durability into the 21st century. Texas eugenicists failed to pass the type of eugenics laws that caused so much suffering in the rest of the United States, but they intensified the xenophobia, religious intolerance, state-sanctioned violence, hard-heartedness towards the poor, the support of mass incarceration, which defined much of the state's politics in the 21st century. To be continued in just a few minutes. Please welcome Dr. Michael Phillips to our pulpit.
It's been a while. Good morning.
Good morning.
Now I'm going to open with what they call in the education biz a trigger warning. I'm about to address a subject that involves racism, homophobia, and medical violence. We'll also talk about various types of sexual behavior. Some of you might find this upsetting or inappropriate for children. I don't know if we have any children, but I will not be offended if you choose to leave. Eugenics was the attempt, primarily from the late 19th to the early 20th century, by elites around the world to selectively breed smarter, stronger, healthier humans the same way that cattle are bred to produce more beef or dogs are bred to herd sheep. They try to accomplish this through two major approaches that historians have often called quote-unquote positive eugenics and negative eugenics. In pursuit of positive eugenics, advocates lobbied their government to provide financial incentives for supposedly biologically fit families to have large numbers of children. You might hear echoes of this from J.D. Vance these days. For instance, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and Turkey paid bonuses to families that were supposedly fit that had a lot of children. Now, these laws were never implemented anywhere in the United States. However, there were eugenic counselors, and couples would go to these eugenicists who then would study with great detail the family history or potential mate. Were there any criminals? Were there any people who were put in mental asylums, etc.? And they might say, might rethink that. And couples would listen to them. Negative eugenics was where that idea became reality in the United States. And it aimed at preventing those the movement deemed as biologically inferior from having children. This involved, in large part, cutting off immigration to the United States from parts of the world with supposedly inferior biology, such as Asia, Eastern and Southern Europe, and all this culminates in the 1924 National Origins Act, a law that Trump advisor Stephen Miller said he deeply admires. One consequence of that law was that it restricted Jewish immigration to the United States from 1924 through, actually the law wasn't replaced until 1965. And that's a barrier that kept Anne Frank and her family from entering the United States. And it would have kept Stephen Miller's ancestors from the U.S. Under the rubric of negative eugenics, there was also a big expansion in the number of institutions for the supposedly mentally ill, the mentally disabled, and the idea was to put them in sexually segregated facilities so they couldn't have children. The most sinister aspect of negative eugenics was this. They pushed for laws authorizing the forced sterilization of the supposedly unfit. First by castration, and by the way, they use that term not only to refer to the removal of testes for men, but the removal of ovaries from women. But later on, hysterectomies, tubal ligations, and vasectomies. Targeting those they deemed inferior. Now, I will note that this happened so often in Mississippi. To black women, it became known as a Mississippi appendectomy. And one of the victims was Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a major leader of the civil rights movement. The most nightmarish culmination of negative eugenics, of course, were the Nazi death camps. Beginning in 1907 with Indiana and ending in 1937 in Georgia, 32 of what were then 48 states adopted forced sterilization laws. The victims were overwhelmingly poor, prisoners, the inmates of mental institutions, African Americans and Mexican Americans seeking medical care and sometimes operated on without their knowledge or consent because they were already under anesthesia, and so on. From the early 20th century, starting in 1907, at least until the 1980s, believe it or not, 63,000, at least 63,841 Americans were placed under the knife against their will, according to the historian Mark Largent. Most scholars think the number is actually bigger than that. California led the way. 20,108 victims that we know of. Now, eugenics tended to have its strongest base of support in those states that invested the most in colleges and universities, which is one reason why California was a leader. It tended to not happen in states that didn't invest in higher education, because the eugenicists were leading biologists, they were leading thinkers, and intellectual leaders. The South actually had less cases of this, Mississippi aside, than most of the country. And certainly this is the surprise, one of the big surprises we encountered. Texas never passed the sterilization law. But that happened because of the worst of all possible reasons. The office holders in Texas in the late 19th and early 20th century, like Governor James Paw Ferguson, regularly attacked universities and colleges basically as playgrounds for spoiled, snobby kids who were children of elites. Depicted the University of Texas as Sodom on the Colorado River. Supposedly the students spent their years drinking, gambling, holding orgies, subsidized by the taxes paid by the common folk. That meant that colleges and universities with these attacks from politicians had trouble recruiting the best and brightest in their fields. And again, this is a fortunate result from a bad thing. It meant that some of the leading eugenicists were reluctant to come to Texas. Texas legislature considered sterilization laws 10 times, or eugenics laws, I should say. They considered eugenics laws 10 times. Actually, starting in the 1850s, 3 decades before the word eugenics was coined by cousin of Charles Darwin, Francis Galton, in 1883. Twice in the 1850s, 1907, 1913, 1935, and 1937. In 1915, the legislature rejected what was commonly called in the era an ugly bill. What was that? Well, eugenicists proposed that people with serious physical disabilities who were supposedly unsightly be prohibited from public spaces. And those laws were actually adopted elsewhere. And the notion was, well, if you're physically disabled, you're probably disabled in other ways, and you're antisocial. A proposed 1923 bill would have required engaged couples to undergo really rigorous medical exams. That failed, as did a 1913 bill that would have expanded the number of mental hospitals in the state, although a similar bill passed in 1915. So 9 of 10 bills that the eugenicists want in Texas failed. So why? I said it was, they were rejected for the worst possible reasons. In addition to hostility to higher education, big factor was greed. The eugenicists were anti-immigration. But there was one group that really wanted wide open border with, guess what? Mexico. Because they wanted to exploit the labor from Mexico. And when the 1924 bill is passed by the U.S. Congress, the harshest bill regarding immigration ever, Texas landowners, cotton growers, lobbied successfully to not include Mexico in the law. And a Texas Congressman, John Box, fought over and over again, and he couldn't get it passed. Now, there are other reasons, but I want to move on. I just want to note that even though the laws weren't passed, that doesn't mean that this idea didn't affect the popular culture. High school and college students were taught eugenics across the curriculum. At the State Fair of Texas in Dallas every year, and in county fairs in Austin, Fort Worth, Houston, Longview, Marshall, Mineral Wells, San Antonio, all across the state, they had fitter family and better baby contests. The picture on our cover is a child being examined for a better baby contest. Contestants were interrogated about their family histories to eliminate anyone who had any ancestors with alcoholism, disabilities, a criminal record, and so on. They subjected them to physical examinations. They gave women Wassermann tests to see if they had syphilis, because the behavior that leads to syphilis was seen as something that's a product of defective minds. Parents won awards. Elsewhere in the state fair, people are winning awards for the best pig or the best cow. Parents got blue ribbons, and entire families got. 1914 fitter family contest in Dallas. Parents could win $15 for having the best child, $5 for the best twins and triplets. Now, had the Texas eugenicists gotten their way, they had many intended victims. Not just those with mental illness and disability and prisoners, those with blindness, those with deafness, those with epilepsy, the mobility impaired, those with spinal abnormality, the nearsighted. The room would be empty, right? They wanted to sterilize, and here's where it gets controversial. I talk about things I couldn't have talked about in my Catholic church when I was a kid. They wanted to sterilize those considered sexually promiscuous, gay men, and even, quote-unquote, chronic masturbators. Now, let me note this, that this is a product of an even deeper cultural trend at the time. American thinkers beginning in the 1830s and 1840s, as the Industrial Revolution is really beginning to pick up, really worried that misdirected sexual energy caused effeminacy, it undermined worker discipline, and it depleted the energy that workers needed to do the job. And so there was a panic simultaneously about not just gay homosexuality, that behavior, but masturbation. Total panic that actually it happened in Britain first, but then it happened in the United States. And this will be in the shadow of the eugenics movement. It'll influence it. Anyone ever have a graham cracker?
Yes.
Do you know the history of that product? Well, that's a product of the anti-masturbation panic. Sylvester Graham, who lived from 1794 to 1851, he was a Presbyterian minister for New England. He believed all sexual energy to be energy depleting, although he did say sex in marriage was the least damaging because it was the least stimulating. We'll do a survey later. Masturbation and homosexuality in particular, he said, led to insanity, suicide, or premature death by natural causes. And one reason why he invents the graham cracker is the original formulation had no sugar. It was designed to be bland, almost tasteless, because it didn't overstimulate the nervous system. Later on, the name is picked up and the recipe is altered. By the way, Friauf himself, he later had a mental breakdown. One historian said he spent his last days backsliding to meat and whiskey in a desperate attempt to save his life before he died at 56. There's also a story his wife may have resented him and actually fed him spicy foods intentionally. Now, medical authorities in Texas, and this will be in the Texas Medical Journal, which is the first major medical publication in the state in the late 1800s till the editor of that publication, Ferdinand Eugene Daniel, dies in 1914. They warn, again, there's a wide range of bad things that could happen if you engage in that behavior. Pimples, spinal tuberculosis, and what they called masturbatory insanity. And they thought that behavior was a gateway to alcoholism, opium abuse, and it's really horrifying what parents did to prevent the behavior because they took the medical advice seriously. And I want to say we felt uneasy a little bit about talking about this history of science going wrong because there's so much bad science denialism about vaccines, etc. But science does take a wrong turn occasionally. So parents, based on medical advice at the time, made their children wear gloves at nighttime, tied their hands to headboards when they went to bed, and they even attached rings that had toothed, sharp edges to boys' genitals in case they got an erection. Circumcision, by the way, is an American thing for men who are not Jewish because they thought that removal of the foreskin would make masturbation less likely. Now, eugenicists believed that biologically inferior people could not control any of their sexual impulses. And that's why they threatened to be so numerous. Smart people are disciplined, they'll restrain themselves sexually, the idea is. So, that behavior, like masturbation and homosexuality, they thought indicated bad, what we call genes today. They didn't know about genes yet. Texas law banned homosexuality in 1860, specifying that, quote, if any person shall commit with mankind or beast the abominable and detestable crime against nature, he shall be guilty of sodomy, and the prison was 15 years. Eugene Daniel, I mentioned, the editor of the Medical Journal, wanted to go further. He wanted to castrate them. And he actually proposed this. He discussed it at one point. He spoke actually about the need to do this. He was a prominent person. One of the subscribers to the Texas Medical Journal was the Surgeon General of the United States. And, he felt like if we do this, if we castrate all these people with all these traits that I've mentioned already, that we'll see an end to consumption, syphilis, insanity, drunkenness, criminal propensity. And he said that Governor James Hogg, had talked to him. Governor Hogg had been Attorney General of the state of Texas, and he said that, this is Daniel quoting Hogg. He said, "A doctor has the same right to castrate a patient as he would to bleed him in the arm or amputate a limb or do any other operation." Now, he was thrilled, Dr. Daniel, in 1894, and he wrote it in his newspaper when news broke out that a Dr. Hoyt Pilcher, who was the superintendent for the asylum for, this is the name of the institution at the time, the Asylum for Idiots and Feeble-Minded Youth in Winfield, Kansas, publicly acknowledged that he had castrated without legal authority 44 mostly teenage boys and 14 girls of a similar age because he deemed them compulsive masturbators and feared their behavior would aggravate their mental disabilities. Well, Daniel never saw his dream for Texas become a reality. The legislature rejected a sterilization bill he was fighting for the year before he died. However, in the Third Reich, which was heavily influenced by British and American scientists, we need to be aware of how deeply the Nazis were influenced by what happened in the United States, also in terms of the segregation laws. The racial laws they passed in 1935 in Nuremberg were based on American Jim Crow laws. They made Daniel's imagined utopia a nightmarish reality from 1933 to 1945. And I'm almost finished, but Nazis had many victims, among them gay men and women and not the non-binary population within their grasp. They burned books about homosexuality, but they also killed gay men and women. About 90,000 were arrested for homosexual behavior between 1937 and 1939. Somewhere between 5,000 and 15,000 were sent to concentration camps where they were made to wear the pink triangles. Many, the death rate may have reached 60% for that group. And those who survived, many of them had been castrated and subjected to traumatizing medical experiments. Now, a lot of people, I think, perceive that eugenics in the United States would have surely ended after the liberation of the concentration camps in Eastern Central Europe, but no, that's incorrect. California remained a leader in forced sterilizations after World War II. One historian estimates that 2,709 sterilization operations took place in California between 1945, the year World War II ended, and 1980, an average of 74 a year. Sterilization laws remain constitutional. The last time the U.S. Supreme Court weighed in on the constitutionality of a forced sterilization state was in 1927. The court upheld a Virginia law authorizing the sterilization of Carrie Buck, an 18-year-old incorrectly diagnosed as mentally disabled, who was institutionalized because she became pregnant as a teenager after she had been raped by a relative. And the Virginia authorities said this is a family with a history of mental limitations. Writing for the Supreme Court majority, Associate Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes in the 1927 Buck v. Bell decision upheld the constitutionality of Virginia's sterilization law, declaring 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. That's still the law of the land, technically. Supreme Court has never overturned the Buck decision. Meanwhile, eugenics is making a disturbing comeback. Trump is echoing old eugenicist ideas with his many references to immigrants coming to the country with, quote, bad blood or bad genes. Neo-eugenicists held a natalist conference in Austin twice in the last 3 years. The last one, I think, tickets cost you $10,000. And it was held in the Swank Hotel that's on the grounds of UT Austin. Vice President J.D. Vance and Trump's estranged, we'll see how long that lasts, donor Elon Musk are calling for those born in the U.S. to have larger families And of course, they're also calling for immigration restrictions. Writing of the threat of a new eugenics based on ableism, homophobia, and other hateful attitudes becoming respectable science once more in the future. Two writers, Callum McKellar and Christopher Bechtel, wrote this, quote, "To protect humanity from such a prospect, a compassionate, civilized society should learn to accept all possible future children in an environment that reflects its unconditional and equal acceptance of the suffering as well as the happy child. It is up to us to ensure that the horrifying dreams of modern eugenics never become our waking reality." Thank you.
Our benediction today is by Rebekah Savage, and it's called Our Calling in the World. We have come to the end of our service, but not our calling in the world. We close our time together with the humble reminder that justice and equity are our spiritual practice to embrace each day, every day. We are blessed to be the embodiment of what is possible when justice and equity ground us in all that we do. May we go forth with the light and warmth of our chalice in our hearts until we are together again. Please go in peace.